Hall meeting, and welcome to all of you out there in live stream and virtual land as well. Want to do some thank yous. Number one, thanks to the Alabama Department of Mental Health for allowing this grant to present this material to all over Alabama to kind of clear some things up about home and community-based services and other things that you'll hear about later. Want to thank Dr. Peebles for allowing us to meet here today at the Independent Living Centers. I want to thank Alabama Care and Alex Bimes for promoting this live stream and through the Zoom. And thanks for the IPT Interpretive Services, LPT, I'm sorry, Interpretive Services for providing that. And we're just very pleased to be a part of this to get the information out. And I want to thank Kim Spangler, our Family Outreach Coordinator, for putting all this together and making sure that this happens. A few little house rules before we get started. There's some information sheets on the table over here. Everything that will be discussed today is on that table. And if you're in virtual land, you can go to our website at the Arc of Alabama, and there's a resource guide for you to click on to get the same material as here in person. During the speech of the speakers, if there's any questions that pops in your head, there's notepads in front of you, just jot them down. And when it comes to the question and answer, raise your hand, I'll bring the mic so the people that's watching virtually can also hear the question. Or if you just have a good memory, you can raise your hand and do it from memory. The facilities, if you have to use them, they're straight up this hallway out the door here, up the ramp and to your left. There's refreshments, water, snacks, and there's drinks in the cooler. If you want to get thirsty or hungry, just get up and go help yourself. And lastly, please, this time, turn down your phones or turn off your phones so everybody will have a chance to hear. And then that being said, once again, thank you all for coming. And I want to turn it over to Kim Spangler, our Family Outreach Coordinator.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for coming out this morning. We've got 2 hours of jam-packed information. And so I'm excited to bring this to everybody. We've got our online people joining us and our guests here live. So what we want to do to be fair to everybody is hold our questions till the end if you can. We've got some little notepads in front of you on the table with some pens. Feel free to write down your questions as we go. And then we'll have about 25 minutes toward the end to answer any questions you might have. And we'll be getting some from online as well as we monitor our chat. So I'm excited to be here. This is a big deal to me. It is. I hope it is to you because there's so much new and so much change happening. And I think it's all really good. And so I get to be here and talk to you about this new and this exciting change for our state. And Dr. Peebles has graciously agreed to share some time with us as well. I know he's got a lot on his plate today as he tries to run the center and entertain guests and speak with us all at the same time. So we're going to ask Dr. Peebles to go first just to be respectful of his time as well. But hopefully he'll pop back in toward the end and answer all those really hard HCBS questions I may not have the answer to, but I know he does. So we will welcome Dr. Peebles, and you all have a handout in front of you I just passed out that kind of summarizes his presentation. So after that, we'll watch a video, and we're going to cover the following topics as well as we can. We'll start out with HCBS. That'll be our first major expert topic that we deliver on today. And then after that, we're going to cover some stuff with guardianship reform for our state and all that's going on with that. We're going to cover PCP. We're going to cover self-directed and community waiver program services and anything that goes along with that as far as transition goes. So that's a lot, but I think we can do it. And I'm excited to get started. So I'm going to let Dr. Peebles take it away.
Awesome. Got my business cards over here on my left tray. So if you want to put them on the table, pass them out however you want. Thank you.
Do I need to turn this off now?
Are we hot? Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And am I in the shot? I would have first, I recognize two of my board members that are in the audience today. Mrs. Carolyn Green and Mr. Brian Johnson, who is also an individual we support here at the center. So thank you guys for being here today as well. Why are we here today? We're here because of a lot of advocates just like you. And the video is going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute, but I'll give you a little bit of a primer. We're here because there was a push in the mid to late 90s after the ADA was passed to see getting our folks into our communities out of large settings, away from their families, in homes, in smaller shared apartments, shared residencies, and really get them to be active participants in every aspect of American life through community inclusion and providing people supports where they are, instead of in some sort of far distant environment. And so what really brought us here? We all know that the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990 and signed by our 41st President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, excuse me, on July 26, 1990. And about 9 years later, there was a civil rights case out of Georgia called the Homestead versus LC. And what that basically said is that all government funded services, whether that's from the state of Alabama, whether that's from the federal government, have to be provided in the most integrated setting. And part of this, after there is a Supreme Court decision, federal government agencies have to develop a set of rules that actually implement what the decision asked them to do. So in 2014, the Department of Health and Human Services released language for what they call the home and community-based setting rule. For various political reasons that I won't get into, it took basically, almost 14 years to get the full implementation. Full implementation just happened earlier this year on March 17. And part of what full implementation looks like is that we need to provide individualized activities for folks based on their strengths, interests, and preferences, as opposed to what everybody else in the day program or the camp program wants you to do. This is supposed to be a person and family driven process through a process of what we call meaningful discovery, where we actually engage in regardless of the person's quote unquote functional diagnosis, we actually engage and basically finding out what their interests are, whether we go through asking questions, or for our folks that are non-traditionally communicative, it goes into working with families, working with support folks, and also, and this is my favorite part, is just engaging in an immersion process. You know, just using nonverbals, having a skilled therapist or community support person engaging in observing nonverbals to see what are the reactions of John Green when we bring him to certain environments. Is the music too much for him? You know, is the visual stimulation, is he you know, tuning to it, or is he tuning out? You know, just, and that's, for example, that's what our staff here has been doing for the past almost a year now. It's trying to become skilled at doing those nonverbals. And this can apply to every aspect of life, whether it's community day, where there's community recreation day, you know, learning environments, training environments, and you know, volunteer and working environments. So really what this is about is we are personalizing the service model, and by virtue of that, we're also able to increase our staff to individual supported ratio. So your individual is it's not just a cookie cutter because someone's on the autism spectrum. It's tailored to their needs, wants, and preferences. So my closing thought to you is, and the video will go into this more, is, you know, this is that canvas that you and your support coordinator and your family, your individual that you support can actually say, this is what we want to do. There's no prescriptive system coming from ILC or ARC or VR. It's developing the PCP is a collaborative process between everybody that's important to the individual's life. And Kim's gonna talk about the non-professional team approach that's worked very well for her, Colby, and the rest of her family. So I'll get out of the way and turn things over to Kim and the rest of her team. And I will be dropping back in shortly. Thank you very much.
Dr. Thank you. Is it on? Now is it on? You got me? Okay. All right. I'm going to pass this around. I have one copy because it's really long, but the training that ADMH did when we went out into the service provider land, as I call it, is this. It came from this. They sent advocates, self-advocates, trained professionals, paid professionals, volunteers out into the provider care system and said, this is what we've got to be in compliance with so that we meet these HCBS standards. And so these were the questions asked, and you can see the categories within each. It's 20 pages. You can find it on the ADMH website, but I wanted you to be able to get an idea of what we're looking for when we're talking about HCBS compliance. So I'm going to pass this around and let you take a peek, but please go online because there's a lot more information on the ADMH website. Okay, you've all got, Dr. Peebles used a really good word I love. It's the canvas to work with. You've all got a legal size piece of paper in front of you, 2 pages long, that basically spells out in writing those words on that canvas. And if it were me and I were you, and I had a loved one or family member in the provider care system right now, I would use that to develop my PCP. I would use that in conjunction with the life course tools. And I don't know if any of you have heard about the life course tools. I've got some handouts I'm going to pass around with those in a minute. But if you are going to be able to make a really good PCP, that a person-centered plan that is also home and community-based settings rule compliant, that's how you would do it. You would make sure your PCP addresses each of these categories in that way. And then you would also go into the life course tools, which I'll show you in a minute, and look at each of those life domains and make sure you've got each domain covered as far as access to the community goes and what kind of good life or what that picture of a good life looks like so that you can create that canvas. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, so I've got a plain language video for you and anybody else in the virtual guest category we're going to watch real quick. And that plain language video for home and community-based setting services settings rule is a good summarization, but I would encourage you after this video or during the video to write down questions you may have. They can be specific to you and your family. They can be broad and generalized. How is Alabama going to fill in the blank? Whatever you can come up with. And if we can't answer them, we will. If we can't, I'll direct you to somebody who can. All right, so let me get this started. I'll pull this around. A large legal size copy of HCBS rules I just passed out, that came from ADAP. So it's trustworthy. They know what they're talking about. IEPs in a school setting, your person-centered plan, sometimes providers still refer to them as ISPs, the individualized support plan, but the ISP, the PCP, that's also a legal working document, just like the IEP was in school, all right?
Hi, I'm here to tell you about a rule called the Home and Community-Based Services HCBS Settings Rule that supports inclusion and integration of people with disabilities in the community. People with disabilities deserve the same rights to make informed choices and have access to the broader community and integrated employment just as anyone else. We know that when people are part of their community, they are more likely to make decisions for themselves, have more friends, and have better lives. There is a new rule called the Home and Community-Based Settings HCBS Settings Rule that helps support these important outcomes. The HCBS Final Settings Rule, or the Settings Rule, is a federal policy change announced by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, to make sure that people with disabilities have the kind of services they want in their communities. The settings rule requires that the places where people receive Medicaid HCBS services offer full access to the benefits of community life. In case you are wondering, if you are receiving supports to live in the community, they are most likely funded by a federal program called Medicaid HCBS or a waiver. And these clips will help you learn about how this new rule applies to you. One of the reasons that the government came up with the settings rule was because of input from self-advocates who said they wanted more choice, more respect, more access, and more options. Under the settings role, you get to control where you live and whether you live with someone. You get to control how you earn money and where you work. You get to control what you do during the day and who you spend time with. You can learn more about what the role guarantees in the clip, What Does the Role Guarantee? What are home and community-based services? Home and community-based services help people with disabilities live their everyday lives. They can include things like personal care, respite, residential supports, transportation, employment supports, and other things. These services are provided in the community instead of in nursing homes, institutions, or other settings that may isolate people from other members of the general community. One important point of the settings role is that there is a difference between institutional services and community services. If people are getting money through Medicaid HCBS, they must be getting community services. States get to decide how they run their Medicaid programs. Keep in mind that HCBS services, sometimes called waiver services, might have different names in different states. But the point of the services is to help you live your everyday life. To be on the waiver, people must show that they need support to live in the community. Without the services provided through the waiver, they might have to live in an institution. Although HCBS waiver services have been available since the 1980s, many people with disabilities still do not have the opportunities they would like to be active and included members of their neighborhoods and local communities alongside people without disabilities. They may live in the community, but might not be a part of the community. The settings rule was passed to help to address this. There are some important dates for you to know about. Let's talk about 3 in particular. The settings rule came out in 2014, but it takes time for states to evaluate all of their services and for providers to make changes. States were originally told by the federal government that they had until 2019 to follow the rule. But now the federal government has given states a little more time, and now they have until 2022 to fully comply. As part of the final settings rule, every state was required to submit a statewide transition plan, sometimes called an STP, to CMS. CMS stands for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They are the federal agency that oversees the HCBS program and helps pay for it. In each state's transition plan, they must describe how they will make sure that the settings where people live, work, spend their day, and receive HCBS services are truly community-based. You can visit www.hcbsadvocacy.org to find out about your state's STP and learn about opportunities to provide input into the plan and the way it is carried out. Throughout the transition process, states should ask you for your input about the HCBS services you receive, the places where your services are provided, and changes that could be made to help you get the community life you want. This is your chance to share what community life means to you. You can learn more about what you can do to make sure your voice is heard in the clip entitled A Call to Action. Even though the settings rule was put in place for states, providers, and agencies to follow, the reason the government made the settings rule was for you, for people receiving services. You can learn more about the settings rule and what it guarantees you as a person receiving Medicaid HCBS services and the clip, What Does the Rule Guarantee? You can learn more about the choices you should be making in the clip called Your Life, Your Choice. An additional clip called Rights, Restrictions, and Modifications outlines the assurances that must be in place if any of your rights are restricted or modified. The settings rule also lists additional requirements that must be met in settings that are owned or controlled by a provider, both in residential and in day and work settings. These are covered in 2 clips: HCBS provider requirements for residential settings and HCBS provider requirements for non-residential settings. The settings rule also provides conditions for person-centered planning. You can learn more about person-centered planning in the clip HCBS and person-centered planning. It's important to remember that the settings rule covers all types of HCBS settings. If you live in a group home, for example, or go to a day program and receive HCBS services, the settings rule applies to you. We invite you to watch the following clips to learn more about the HCBS final settings rule and learn how it can help ensure you have access to the community, choice, individual rights, and independence. If your HCBS services don't provide you with these opportunities, the clips will assist you to find ways to speak up and make a change.
Okay, so you can go online if you want to rewatch that or look at some of the clips they were referring to. Is this working? Some of the clips that they were referring to in the video, you can just simply type in Google on YouTube and hit videos, HCBS rule, and it'll take you straight to it. It pops up. It's one of the ones at the top. So it'll be easy to find. I would encourage you to do that just because those clips give you so much more detail and go in depth more about how to get what you're supposed to be getting if you're not getting those. Questions right now about HCBS, if you want to write those down, you can. If you've got a short, quick one, we can take those. I'll answer them best that I can. I hope that you've got the overall basic idea, which is we're moving out of and away from the institutional settings where it was a more isolated and more segregated environment. And we're moving into communities where we're trying to make sure everybody gets to interact the way they want to, with who they want to, where they want to, when they want to, and how they want to. In other words, have a normal life, live the same way you and I live, just with support, because we all need support in one way or another, right? That's the bottom line basic idea. Yes, ma'am. You need a mic. Hang on just a second so that everybody online can hear your question also. So this is the part where the video addressed, this is time for your input. We're going around the state. These meetings are happening once a month, every month until September in each region. And so we're highlighting a different topic that we're trying to cover and address and gather and collect input. So for that reason, and for us to collect information to bring back to DMH, we need you to use a microphone, speak loudly, speak clearly, and just ask any question you could possibly think of, and we will find an answer for you. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, go right ahead. You're good.
Okay. Going by what you were just talking about, I listened in on the last town hall meeting.
Okay, good.
And one of your statements regarding the HCBS rules regarding community integration, no more seclusion, segregated settings.
Right.
Okay. A statement was made that they have to get out. Okay. So part of that question is if they are, I see on the ID waiver listing, there are two categories. One is day habilitation services. The other one is community day habilitation.
Right.
So a two-part question. Number one, can you distinguish for us the difference between the two?
Mm-hmm.
And the second part of that question is when it stated that they have to get out in the community, say if they're in a community day program or day habilitation program, whatever it may be, what are the requirements as far as how often per week? Is it every single day, a couple of days a week, a couple of hours a week? We need clarification on that.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that two ways. When you have a waiver, you're going to have a PCP, a person-centered plan developed. All right. The whole idea is to use your person-centered plan to personalize your access to the community, right? So if for you, that means every day, 5 hours a day, every day of the week, 5 hours a day. I'm going to be out in the community. I'll do this on Sunday. I'll do this on Monday. I'll do that on Thursday. Whatever that looks like for you, that's got to be addressed in your person-centered plan. All right. So that's the access to the community part. Now, it's individualized, and it needs to be, because my community life looks a lot different than Carolyn's. I would love to be able to spend time doing artwork. I don't know if you've seen Carolyn's artwork. It should be commissioned, but it's beautiful and it's gorgeous. I can't paint to save my life. Nobody would buy it, much less look at it. So I'm not going to put 3 hours of painting time in my schedule for the community. It's going to be the same thing for anybody else, right? It's based on your individual interests, your individual ideas, your opportunities, your community. A large city community looks much different than a more rural area. So that's all individualized. And that's how your PCP needs to reflect that access to the community.
Okay. So let me make sure I'm understanding this. So it's not a rule or part of the settings rule where they have to go out every day of the week, regardless of the weather. They have to stay out the entire program day. They can say, be out in the community a few hours a day and then come back to their, I call it home facility.
Mhm.
Let's just use UCP or ILC.
Right.
And incorporate OT, PT, speech therapy in that setting.
Correct.
Okay.
So what that means is, if somebody, when they go out into the community, becomes overwhelmed or exhausted or whatever reason, and they find it easier or more comfortable or more preferable to be out of the community in a home, doing whatever it is they prefer to do in a home or in a day hab program, that's their choice. The whole idea is choice here. We're not trying to force anybody to do anything. We're trying to come into compliance with those federal guidelines that are telling us you now have to provide access to the community, and it has to be based on your personal choice. That's why I keep going back to, please take a heavy, solid, long, detailed look at your person-centered plan if you have waiver services, because the catch is, and this is true for any provider service, if it's not addressed in the person-centered plan, then it doesn't have to happen. And sometimes the word doesn't have to happen turns into we can't or we won't. So address it in the person-centered plan, first and foremost. Use this to go to develop that person-centered plan, and then also the life course tools. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Now, I'm sorry, I'm almost finished.
You're fine.
So if we can go back to distinguish between day hab services and community day hab.
Okay. So day hab services, without the word community in it, is a place. That's a location. I know it says services, but it's a program that happens in a place. That's the traditional way to think of it, is a day hab program, right? A place that you go and you would do whatever different activities they've got going on in that place with your peers. Often, a lot of these day hab programs will have volunteers come in from the general public, and that helps mix things up and not be so isolated or segregated of a setting. But usually it's a preference or a choice somebody would make. Just like my own son, there are days this is funny. This is a true story. I don't cook. I'm not very creative, am I, Carolyn? So I'm not creative in the kitchen. I'm not creative on the campus, but I don't cook. My son in college had a roommate whose mama cooked, and she would send these delicious meals to her son and make more for his roommates. And all of a sudden he got to college and got a bunch of home cooked meals and thought he was living in heaven. So when it was vacation or spring break or summer, he had the choice. He could go to his friend's mom's house where it was just him and his friend and his other college roommate who also had, and intellectual disability, or he could come home. And when he's home, we go out. We don't sit at home. We're very busy. We're very active in our community. We're very active in our church. That's probably why I don't cook, because I'm just not home much. He chose, I'm going to Davis's house where his mama cooks and we can sit at home with each other and eat her good food. That was his choice. Did it hurt my feelings? A little bit, but that's what he preferred. So without that choice, then we're not in compliance. All right. Community Day Hub is taking the same program ideas, the same program activities, volunteering in the community, getting work experience in the community, going and practicing a hobby in the community, doing all kinds of different recreational activities in the community. It happens during those daytime hours, the same time a day hub program would, but you're taking a very small group of people, typically 4 to 1 is the ratio that we see, out into the community to do what they prefer to do with who they prefer to do it with. That's separate.
Experience. It could be like.
It is community experience.
Okay, it could
Yeah.
be recreational, social activities.
Correct.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Yes. Good questions.
From the provider side, even if their plan says they don't want to go in the community, you have to offer it at least once a week. You
Yeah,
have
it has to
offer
be
it.
offered.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Has to be in the person-centered plan. If it's not, it can be changed. You
Right.
don't have to wait another year to do it.
All right.
You can change it.
You are correct. That's why I keep going back. Look at the person-centered plan. That's going to be your access to all of this is with, if you're using a waiver on any of the waivers, if you're using a waiver and you're going through a provider, that access is going to be identified through your person-centered plan. Yes.
If you're not happy and you want to change a person-centered plan, how do you do that?
So the first thing you need to do is tell your provider and go, whoever that, where did my, I don't have, somebody's got my flyers with the ADMH number on it. But first thing you need to do is tell your provider. There are different providers all over the state. That's it. I'm going to borrow that from you real quick. You go to your provider and you tell them immediately, I need to have a team meeting. We need to make some changes to our person-centered plan. You need to submit those ideas or suggestions or requests in writing. That would be my first suggestion to you, is submit that in an email or in writing to your provider. They've got a certain number of days to comply. I think now it's 90. It might be less. But they've got to comply to your request and at least set up a meeting. If you can't get anywhere that way, then you can call this number and they'll get you to the right people, but it's ADMH. You can also go to their website, but it's 1-800-361-4491. Your person-centered plan is only required to have to happen or be reviewed once a year. That for my son, we're not using waiver services. We use a supported decision-making team, and I'll talk about that in a minute. For my son, that's just not enough. We meet once a month with one person on the team. We meet twice a year with the whole team. And the reason for that is twofold. So I would encourage you to try to somehow address your person-centered plan more than once a year, because things change, people change, needs change, environments change, circumstances change. We just typically don't go through a whole entire year without any kind of change that would affect a PCP. So that would be my best advice to you on that. All right. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am. Carolyn. She's been waiting on me. I'll get to you, Betty, I promise.
One really significant issue we're seeing in the communities is that even if you have a person-centered plan that
I don't think we can hear you. Is it on? Just scream at us. Just scream at us.
One of the problems we're seeing in the communities, the people who have a person-centered plan, is that we don't have providers to meet what we have in our person-centered plan because there don't seem to be enough employees to staff, and there are not often the programs in place. The last speaker and I both have adults with significant physical disabilities. And with that in mind, they need to have some time and a place. They cannot be out in the community all the time and have their physical needs met. So that is a big problem that we need to look at and not forget that population. It's a huge population, a big population. And I would love to see the percentage of people with physical disabilities who cannot stay out in a van or however people go.
Right.
Yeah, throughout the day.
Right.
Yes.
So that's the one-to-one care, the personal care that needs to be bolstered that you're referring to. But
the problem is the workforce
Yep.
in the community and the providers being able to help us with that, because we're having a real reversal here. People are becoming sequestered and isolated because the providers are not meeting the need from their lack of employees, lack of staff, or not having a day program, a traditional day program, which could meet the needs of these people. And still they could go out in the community several times a week, not never, but just have their needs met.
Mm-hmm.
That is the issue.
So the national staffing crisis right now, it's not unique to Alabama at all, is a big part of these self-directed services. I think I'm comfortable enough saying, if I can see the handwriting on the wall as clearly as I think that I do, it's that we've got to figure out a way to compensate for this national staffing crisis. And if we cannot do that, then we're in trouble. But this national staffing crisis, not only in Alabama, is a huge problem. There aren't enough people who care enough, and there's not enough money to pay enough. There could be, there should be. That's the politics Dr. Peebles was referring to, that personally, our hands are tied, but we're working on it. That's where we're going with this. And I would strongly encourage you, everybody in our virtual audience can look at it now. If you don't use Facebook, get on it for this reason alone. There are organized groups of families and caregivers. Mrs. Betty created one herself just from our PIPA partner program. But get on Facebook, go under the groups setting. I learned about one just yesterday. TERP Info, a Facebook group where all of our ASL TERP, TERP info, it's a Facebook group where all of our interpreters within the state and sometimes other states gather and talk about current events and issues, and you can post a need and find an interpreter for, whether you like social media or not, it's a tool. And you can use it. And if you'll join these groups like Seeking Supports for Caregivers on Facebook, that's going to lead you into a part of the society that can help compensate for this national staffing crisis. It's not the be all and the end all. It's not going to solve all of our problems, but it's a step, and we might as well try. I absolutely will, but I've got a whole list of them. I'm on as many as I know to be on. Yes.
I wanted to speak right quick on what Mrs. Green brought up. We heard your voices. We heard the advocates' voices. We heard the parents' voices. And because of you and your diligence, the parents, people out there, virtual land, the service providers, me, Jessica, we went to the legislature and we, based through the Alabama Department of Mental Health, put a rate study in for these rate increases to help maybe not wipe out the shortage, but help with the shortage. They heard us, they put in an amount, which was what, 17.1 million, something like that. The commissioner of the Alabama Department of Mental Health said, okay, we're going to focus on these 5 areas that we listened to you about that really was isolating our individuals we're serving. In that 5 areas, she proposed to the legislator 11.5 million to cover this so we can get these rate increases and get these people in place to serve. Well, the governor only put 5.5 in the budget. So we hit the legislature, y'all hit the legislature, got your distinguished out there. Our legislative day really did a great job, went around with our individuals, and the Congress and the Senate bumped that up to 10.5. So we're not all the way to 17, but we're not back down at 5.5. So we're in the process now of getting that money, using it, and hopefully help with this shortage to get this isolation over with. Okay. We know there's a shortage, and I know Jess has a headache every day about it. She's one of our art chapters here in Southwest Alabama. We have one here in Baldwin, Mobile, Clark County, which actually is not here, but we're trying, you know, and we kind of feel a little disappointed, but successful because, you know, just think about 5.5 wouldn't have been able to help nothing. The 10.5 at least gets us back in the ball game, and we can get some people that want to work. And then as you as an individual, when we talk about self-directed services, it'll help you as well. But I wanted to get that out there so you'll know that hopefully help's coming. Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Hey, so my name is Niles Valentine, and he mentioned employment. I really think instead of it just being HCBS, we should add HCAEBS, academic and employment, because that's one of those are the 2 biggest environments that I see people don't talk enough about when it comes to applying this rule to. When I did the site reviews back in I think February, I met a lot of people who were in the system who had dreams and aspirations that could make them a lot of money, that they would make them really happy doing that, and that's how they get out into the community, and that's how they would be spending their days. And I don't think that's really recognized enough. There's a lot of laws in place in Alabama in general that would make this really hard to apply HCBS settings rules to.
Right. So you're wanting more of a focus on the academic training toward employment. Am I hearing you right?
The academic training, academic setting, once you get employed, the employment setting.
Gotcha.
And because let's be honest, in this society, academia and the employment world, it's a big part of our community life.
I would agree with you on that. One of the new trends that we've seen most recently is something called micro certificates, where there are different companies out in the community willing to do training on a 6 to 12 to 20 week basis for somebody that might need support in that company and in that training, but they're willing to grant what they call a micro certificate in a specific trade, so that that person can take that micro certificate, put it on their resume, and go out into the workforce and say, hey, I have this specialized training. I can do these things. Another way for the academic piece to come in are all of these different think colleges. I know Alabama has 5 different think colleges around the state where students can enroll, live on campus, get some independent living skills, get some internships under their belt for workforce training, and then graduate with a certificate of occupational studies and go out into the workforce with that on their resume. I know Project Search is still in full force. So we're working on it. We're certainly not there yet by any means, but I think that the more community access we have with volunteer work, I think the more community support we can get, the better off we'll be toward that end. So thank you for sure for that comment. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, going back to staff shortages, caregiver shortages.
Mhm.
shortages. Okay, on the rates and limitations sheet that I have, it says for personal care, I want to get this clarified. Personal care services, and I'm speaking specifically of in-home personal care through the ID waiver.
Okay.
It says $5.50 for 15 minutes, which equals out to about $22 an hour, correct? So
250, yeah.
our caregivers are making nowhere near that. So we don't understand why it's $22 an hour, but
I think it's up to 22, but yeah, you need to give somebody a call on that.
Who would
and
that be?
clarify it. ADMH.
ADMH. So if our caregivers are telling us, well, we're going through an agency, I'm not speaking of self-directed,
Okay.
going through an agency, you're only getting 8, 9, maybe 10 an hour. We understand the agency has to get their portion, but there is no way we're going to get enough caregivers, especially under today's circumstances,
Right.
at that rate. No
and
way.
the ratio plays into it as well.
Okay.
So when you look at the ratio and you look at the rate, that's all coming straight to us from CMS through ADMH, and it's given to the provider to distribute accordingly, right? So it's not, obviously, it's not that it's going to be less than or more than, it's that it's going to be enough. So that's a direct ADMH question. Yes, ma'am.
One-
Yes, sir.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Hang
going
on.
back to all the rates again. Okay, same thing under personal care transportation. I wanted to get a statement on this clarified. The statement reads under definition of service. The planning team must also assure the most cost-effective means of transportation, which would include public transportation where available. Transportation by personal care attendant is not intended to replace generic transportation or to be used merely for convenience. I don't understand merely for convenience. If you're allowing a caregiver, in-home caregiver, to use your vehicle or their vehicle to transport someone in the community to provide community integration, how do you justify, how does the caregiver justify merely for convenience? And the question in the statement in the other section says, or merely to provide transportation. I'm just not understanding if we write down, well, they're going to the art exhibit. We've got to justify. We can't just ride around town
Mhm.
to be reimbursed,
It's
right?
exactly what you just said.
Okay.
We are not going to pay for people to be in a van riding around town and call it an experience.
Thank you.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Now, if you have a destination and you have a plan for that destination and it fits well within the PCP, then that works. But what we're not going to do is pay for sightseeing and call it community experience.
Because it has to be documented what the community experience or outing was.
Yes, and it has to be outcome based.
Yes.
It has to have intent. It has to have that the activity has to have intent that matches with some of the plans and goals in the PCP for that to work.
Since you're gathering information for ADMH, I just wanted to say something that's related to HCBS. When community day hab is used,
Mhm.
if someone lives within 10 miles of the facility,
Right.
they don't get transportation. So when you're in a rural area and someone says, hey, we want to go bowling.
Mhm.
We want to go to a movie. We want to go to a sporting event. And we travel 120 miles to do that.
Right.
Even if they're level 1 and even if they live within 10 miles of that facility, that's
Right.
how they designate that. So just as you're gathering information for ADMH, the transportation component of community day needs to be looked at because community
Right.
is not necessarily within 10 miles of the facility.
Exactly. So When you live in the city, that's one and done. You can get there in 5 minutes. But when you live in a rural area, it's going to take you 20 or 30 just to get there. So we've recognized that as providers, and that's definitely a discussion we are currently having with ADMH. What I want to assure you of is, again, if you can get something like that specific example written into the PCP and get it out of that 20% ICF funding and put it into the 80% HCBS and word it that way in your PCP, then you're good. Does that make sense to everybody? Get the PCP to address it. Plain and simple, word for word. Yes.
So to go back to a question that she asked earlier, that she posed earlier, I do think a lot of solutions should come from within this disabled community itself. Like, for example, the staff shortages. Well, why not
For sure.
hire people who say have lived experience already, who already know how to deal with disability. Like, for example, I'm autistic and I have ADHD. I have found myself able to connect with other people with autism and ADHD a little bit better because, simply put, I know what it's like to,
You get it.
I know it's like to live with it. And by live with it, I mean, like, I can't turn it off. Just like Dr. Peebles, he has cerebral palsy. He knows what it's like to be in that wheelchair and he can't get out of it.
Mm.
So I think that's also going to address a lot of other issues if we start reaching in within the community, because there's a lot of people in this in the disabled community, in the DD and the ID community, that are a lot smarter than people give them credit for, who think outside of the box more than people give them credit for.
I would agree with you 100%. COVID really put a light on that for us. And there were a lot of things that happened out of necessity and survival mode while we were in COVID. And we saw people step up within the provider system to literally go into a peer mentoring kind of a role that they had never really been in before, because they had to. And now, shame on us, we're looking back going, well, we should have been doing that all along. That's easy. That works.
And you know what?
Yeah.
I think one of the few good things that came out of COVID for me was people finally starting to see that. Yeah, you see what it's like to be basically shut in, to basically not be able to participate in social skills. You only got a glimpse of that. Imagine not being able to turn that
lifelong.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Lived experience trumps any kind of certificate or degree out there. I can promise you that. Always should be on a resume. Always should be at the forefront of our mind.
I was
when
about
hiring.
I was about to say something exactly like that, because I noticed that there was a lot of people who, when I was doing the site reviews, I had a few people get surprised at me when I said that I'm gonna go talk to them, like, they're nonverbal. Give me a few minutes. Within 5 minutes, I had quite a few of the consumers talking to me, and basically they wouldn't shut up, to use a layman's terms.
Yeah.
It's just talking to them with dignity and respect. And I was surprised by the wealth of knowledge and information that I was able to get out of them, because I'm thinking, why? I asked one of them, why didn't you share this with anyone? It says, nobody listened to me.
So you're in a peer mentoring role right now, where you are
right
here
now,
at
yes.
the Independent Living Center. That needs to be a role model for every provider out there. It works. It's golden. It's a win-win. Thank you for sharing that. I love it. All right. Anybody else?
I'd just like to ask him a question to kind of put light into where we're at. And that's a great idea, the peer-to-peer working to help. Let's say we're able to employ you to do that. Okay. But yet right now you're working out at the new Buc-ee's for $18 an hour, but we can only pay you for $8. Where are you going to work?
So first of all, I acknowledge that problem. And, well, simply put, remember when I said earlier, when we need to start addressing a lot more laws than just the HCBS settings rule, especially in academia and in the employment world? That's one of the biggest things that I wanted to address with some of the companies that I'm looking to start, as well as some of the coalitions that I've joined, is giving people more of an incentive to do this kind of work. You want $8 an hour work, or do you want $22 an hour work? okay, so if you want, you get what you pay for, honestly. However, in my case here, this for me, it's less about the money and more about the long-term goal here, because quite frankly, I'm okay with paying $14.50 an hour if it would lead to someone else, say, breaking free of the problems that I had to face growing up. If no one else has to ever deal with what I went through again, okay, fine. Pay me $14.50 for the rest of my life if I have to.
That's a great comment, and you're hired. But you're a unicorn, okay? There's not a lot of people in the community that have the same passion that you do. So what you got? One more, and then we got to move on to the next subject.
Very simple. You said that I was a unicorn. You didn't, okay? Have you looked around? Have you looked within this community? Have you actually sat down and talked to people? Well, when I did, I found out I wasn't so unique. Let's put it like that.
And you're not unique, and that's some of the process we're going through right now to make people like yourself that are willing to do that to get to that point. But as far as others, it's in other areas, it's rare. I will say that, but you're correct.
Niles has big plans. I love it. All right, I'm going to move on. We've got one more guest speaker with us today, and I'm not going to steal any of her thunder. I don't know enough about her subject and topic to begin with to even address it the way she could. But one more tool, and a really good one, on the table for self-directed supports, for independent living, even for providers within the system on different waivers, would be tech-based or enabling tech for homes and people that use different services in different ways that can literally support, complement, supplement staff when staff is not available. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to our representative here. She's from SafeInHome, and I'm going to let her tell you all about herself and what they do. And you want me to hand your information out while you're speaking? I'll give these out, and then this one right here.
Those are the, and then this also can complement.
Okay. All right. So Melissa Walker is with us today. She's going to talk to you about home-based tech, enabling tech, and all of this new and exciting information. I'm going to pass these out and hand the mic to you.
Hey, thank y'all for having me. My name is Melissa Walters. I am with SafeInHome, and we now we're new to the state of Alabama. We are not new in general, but remote supports is new, and that is what we offer. So remote supports, it is new to the state of Alabama. So with that being said, a lot of people are kind of, well, what is that? How can it help me? What can it do? So what remote supports can do is if you can dream it and you want to do it, we can help support you. Whether that be in your home, a group home, whether it be if you want to walk every day down to the supermarket, we have different devices that can help support that, along with a wonderful team that's going to support you no matter what. Our remote support center, we're open 24/7, 365. So what that means is that when you come on remote supports, you will meet and we will develop a team that is specifically designed for you. Everybody's independence looks differently. Everybody needs different things. And I think everybody kind of sees now the common thread of today of everything is person-centered. And with remote supports, it can look different. It can be something as simple as medication management. You don't want someone telling you how to take your medicine, when to take your medicine. You just need just a few casual prompts here and there. It can be something as simple as that. It can be something as simple as like a job. You want to, seek employment and you find a great job. Well, maybe you just need a few pointers just to, make sure you get up in the mornings on time and making sure that you have everything that you need. We can do daily check-in calls just to make sure that, you have your lunch packed, you have your cell phone charged, you're ready to get out the door. It can also be a little more complex than having sensors that run passively in the background that you never have to touch. It's not all technology based. I know that technology is new and great, and it's really, that's just the avenue to link you to remote supports. Our remote support center, all of our remote support individuals, they are they're ACT behavioral trained. So what that means is that they have gone through training for at least 3 months with a licensed psychologist to understand how to empathize, sympathize, and truly understand what individuals feel and how they feel, to help us to support more individuals. So with remote supports, it's truly an asset. We are not wanting to come into the state and replace everything and, to where you're not having direct support providers, because they're needed, and remote supports isn't for every individual. But if you can think it and you want to do it, we want to empower you and to support you. So that is my takeaway. Remote supports is a service. It's not a thing. And we can truly help you become more independent and really get what you want out of the community, whether it be in a group setting, individual setting, or wherever life wants to take you. We can be there to support you. If y'all have questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer any questions and help with anything possible. Okay.
Thank you. I want you to please give us examples of ways you've seen it help, all the way from the smallest thing to the biggest thing, and change somebody's life.
Sure.
Just real life, solid. This happened and it meant that we could do it this way. Examples of real people, everyday use.
Sure. I have an individual that I put on service. They are the sweetest family. They live in Alabama. And this individual did not do well with a tablet. He just didn't do well with a tablet. They wanted to build vocabulary. They wanted to build a communication skill with him. So what I did was I took smart buttons and I took pictures that the individual would recognize with certain things. I connected those to an Alexa device within the home, or an Alexa type device. So whenever the individual wanted those particular things, he would push the button and it would announce, so where now he can actually verbalize things. So that was one of, I say it was a smaller solution, but I mean, and that was more of a tech solution versus remote support solution. But that was just a different way to think outside of the box to truly build an individual plan for that individual. We have another individual that has successfully moved out. She is living on her own, and we do overnight supports. So we help with visitor safety, making sure that she feels safe in her home at night. We do medication management calls. So we call her for her daily check-ins. We watch her take her medicine, make sure that all of that is documented, which anytime anyone has any interaction with a remote support individual, it does get compiled into a weekly report that your support coordinator and your care circle does have access to. So it really can give someone a better picture of how successful you're doing. And, if things need to be changed in the PCP or something like that, it really gives you more documentation to go back on that. But we're doing daily check-in calls with that individual. But they also have one of our geocoms, and the geocom itself, she can reach out to remote supports anytime she wants. If she's out in the community, she can press the button. Remote supports can help her get back to her home. Can just, she's feeling overwhelmed. She's feeling anxious in the community. I don't know about y'all, but if I go to Walmart, I have full on anxiety. It's no secret. It's just, there's too many people, there's too many things. The buggies never want to work either. So it's, it just gives me anxiety to be around people. But just being able to press that button and having somebody to talk to you who knows your plan, who has built a support plan, it helps build that relationship. And like with me, what happens is I come in, I do a consult, and then once we go over the consult, then I submit a proposal, the support coordination goes over that, and then we build you a plan, and we really do become one big team. So, with these individuals, these examples I'm giving, like they're friends now. I mean, I've become close with their families, their support circles. I mean, it's just it becomes a team. But those are two of my solutions. Trying to think of another good one. I have one individual that now lives alone, and they were concerned about seizures. So that this individual currently already wore a watch. So we did not provide a watch, but what we did provide was a seizure bed pad, and it alarms within the home. So natural supports will know if he or she is having an active seizure. So it's not somebody happens to be walking by his room and then that's when they see him having a seizure. No, he'll be alarmed. His roommate will know, and that way we can step in and help and intervene and get him the help that he needs right away. But a lot of that also, we also pair that with just daily check-in calls. Hey, how's your day going? Did you make it to work today? How was class? Just building that rapport also helps with this individual to where they're not alone. They never feel alone because they're not. They're touch of the button support and they can talk to someone. But that's just another solution.
Thank you. Well, I got to get you the mic.
I just had a quick question. Just wanted to know, is this a monthly service? As far as like, if someone did want this service, if they went to their counselor or their case manager, is this a monthly service that we would have to pay for annually? How would we set this up?
So what will happen is you just go back to your support coordinator and you're just, say that you would like to explore the option of remote supports. So what they will do is they'll reach out to remote support providers. They'll reach out to me, and what I will do is I will come in, do a consult, and we'll go over the individual's goals. And with those goals, then we can craft and create a solution that is best for this individual. So it's a month to month. Everything is fluid. Nothing is set in stone. So if you say, hey, I want to try remote supports, we come in, we try it. It's billed monthly. If you don't like it, call me, tell me, what don't you like? What else can we craft? What, you don't like this piece. Okay. Or we have a lot of people who reach their goals. Once you reach a goal, things change. So then we go back to the drawing board. Okay. Do you still need remote supports? Or, okay, well now now I'm employed and I'm going to work between this hour and this hour. You can craft it to where each encounter and everything is person centered to where everything revolves around the person. Like it's a month to month.
Okay. That's what I just wanted to know, because I just know with our agency with VR, we have a lot of consumers that would benefit from this service. And we actually had a representative that came out and spoke about it. But I think for us, it was the subscription part. If there was a way of that, maybe we can do a one-time payment a month, or maybe even like a little trial period just to see if this is something that is suitable for them. But the part about billing it every month, we're just not able to do that. So that's kind of just where the discrepancy comes in a little bit.
If you want to get with me after the meeting, we can see if there's anything that, my company will be more than happy to see what we can do to work and fit everything in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I understand that you cannot have personal care, companion services on the waiver and remote supports. Is that correct?
No. Miss Carolyn was asking, can you not have personal care or companion and remote supports? Remote supports can be complemented with anything. It is not strictly, we complement in even like with DSPs, like the DSP shortage that everyone is speaking of. We're great to fill in those gaps. We're great to fill in where needed.
Okay, you mentioned persons with epilepsy. Is your service covered for people who are just on regular Medicaid, or does it have to go through a waiver?
It has to go through a waiver unless you private pay. We are currently on the ID, the LAH, CWP, and we have submitted for the E and D and ACT waiver. We are currently on LAH, ID, CWP, and we have already applied and should be finishing up the process on the E&D waiver and the ACT waiver. If someone has any other kind of funding grants or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me. We have no problem with, knocking on doors and making phone calls. We can, my company is more than happy to work with anybody, any kind of funding source. I tell every single person I go on a consult with, if I don't know about it, I can't help you. So you have to let me know what you need, how you need it, and what form, and we'll think of it. I mean, we'll see what we can do. Yes. So all of our consults, whenever I submit a proposal, it does have ISP language. So it can help the support coordinators whenever they are putting things in plans, just to kind of help them. We know all of our support coordinators are way overworked and way overstressed. So anything we can do to help take off that burden, please let us know. I have one partner. She is in North Alabama. I cover from Blount County down, but my partner in North Alabama is just as happy to help as I am. All right.
Who was it?
Well, this is kind of not, well, it is and it isn't what you're talking about, but I'm thinking about you too, Kim, is, now like my child, I have guardianship and I think he needs guardianship, but I'm also very interested in what you've done with Colby and the team. Wouldn't it be great if we had a planner that could do that for us? Because that's my problem, is limited family, limited friends that would be willing to do that. But if I had people that I could trust when I'm gone to do that kind of thing, yes. Well, there would obviously have to be a team like you've got for Colby, with all the different aspects, like a medical person, a religious, and I say religious, but we're Christian. We want. I'm thinking about any area that you wanted for your team. As you said, like with Kobe, y'all came up with what. Well, I'm thinking like an IEP or like person-centered plan. You come up with what you need for your team. You could add to it later if you needed to, or take away, change. But instead of like having to do it yourself, having help and getting people to help you. And I'm sure it wouldn't be as good as yours because you were able to do it yourself. But I mean, I've taught special ed so long, I know what a problem it is for families to get what they need for their child. But if the, and it doesn't always work with an IEP team, but if you could, like she was saying, if it could be fluid and there would be somebody that put together that kind of team, and it could be fluid where it could be changed and whatever. To me, that would be a viable thing, because I've thought a lot about the, putting together a team for mine, but I've got more obstacles than Colby's got as far as what I need to leave him with.
So like on a tech team, like what you're referring to, that's me. So I come in, I sit down with your entire care circle. We don't all have to meet in person, but we all sit down, the entire care circle via Zoom, whatever is, complimentary to the family. And then we talk about the goals. And then if you need me to come back every other month to reevaluate, I mean, all you have to do is call me. I'm local in Alabama, and I just come in, and Melissa Walters, but I actually come in and I evaluate your home. I evaluate, the individual, and we literally just sit down like we're talking right now. And we just talk about whatever it is that you need, and we'll go from there. And, we will revisit at least once a year, but if things come up or things need to be changed, you reach out to me. I have a client service representative that's over the state. Her name is Jamie Tagle. I work with her literally every day. Our field service representative is Paris Harris. He's based out of Montgomery, and he works for us, and he's part of our team. And those two are my main people that I communicate with every day. Now, our remote support center, obviously we have, people take vacation and stuff like that, but you typically will get the same person in the call center every time you call. You will typically get the same reminder calls from the same people. Obviously, people have holidays, they take off, that kind of stuff, but you will build that relationship. You will build the relationship with me. You will get to know me. You will get to know our field service. You'll get to know our client services. When things pop up, family wise and that kind of stuff, you can send a quick email to client services. You can call Jamie. You can call me, because we're here to help support you and your individual, however that looks like. If you want to do bi-monthly meetings just to touch base, you can do that. Now, I do want to remind you that you will get a weekly report or have access to a weekly report of all the interactions, and you'll also get to see all of the sensors that run passively in the background. So you'll already have a general idea of what's going on. If you need that, if you want to reach out to me, go ahead. That's what I'm here for.
I guess, Kim, okay, like I have guardianship, and and my husband together, and when I pass, I will have to get guardianship, well, in fact, that's on my list right now, to have us along with a son or continued guardianship, because he was in a group home for a while, and there was a guy that was in that group home who had a court appointed guardian, and the court appointed guardian never laid eyes on him. And that poor child, well, he was an adult, but he was deaf and he could not speak, and he lay in Providence Hospital for 3 months. And I know the nurse wasn't supposed to tell me that, but she said he would not pass away. And I'm like, oh, he's not. And she said he would not get better. They were waiting on the guardian to come see him and sign the papers so that they could take away the life support. When we did, that was part of why I did. Well, there were several reasons why we got guardianship, but that scares me. And I only recently found out that you have to have if you don't have a guardian in place, if we were to pass away, then they would appoint a guardian, or either, I have to have a son or somebody in place, which I've got 2 sons that would be willing to do this. And that may be where I go. But my point is that, they have families, and there's a lot involved with taking care of on a daily basis, just the paperwork, like with the waiver that we have, the self waiver. So I don't know. I'm looking at all kinds of options, but I really like what Kim's done with Colby. I just have stretched my brain for a year now since I found out about it, how I could do that. And I just can't quite get there, because I don't, in years past, yes, I had enough family that would be willing to do it, but all my family that are left are my age. So, with the exception of my sons, anyway, that's what I'm thinking.
Well, let me know if there's anything we can help with. We'll be happy to. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Is there anything, I know one question I wanted to ask. You kept using the word sensory in the background. Can you give us specific examples of what that is and what it does?
Sure. So we have different types of sensors. We have some like motion sensors.
Motion sensors.
They are not cameras. A lot of people like to automatically think it's cameras. No, we typically do not do cameras in the home unless they are specifically requested and there is a specific need for them. But we have bed presence sensors, so that way we'll know if an individual is getting up in the middle of the night. You can do natural supports on those. You can do open and close sensors to where you would know if windows, doors, and that kind of thing are opened. You can also, my favorite to do those on our cabinet doors. We have a lot of individuals with eating disorders and things of that nature. So, you know, you don't need to lock a cabinet because then that's a modification or a restriction, and that's a big no-no. But we can monitor and know when those cabinets are open and also do something about them at that point, as in remote supports can reach out to natural supports or even pay provider backup to ensure why those doors are being opened. You can do water leak detectors. We have carbon monoxide and smoke detectors is actually a really big one. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, no, because they have carbon monoxide and smoke detectors in the home. Well, that's great. Does that individual know what to do if it were to alarm? Does, you know, is there a plan? Is somebody going to go over there and make sure that that individual can get out? Because I can't guarantee, like in a fire or something, that I'm not going to freeze up and be like, oh my goodness, you know, I'm 34 years old and I should know what to do. But, you know, it's one of those things where you really don't know until it happens. But we have different devices of one of our most popular is going to be the tablet. And that is touch of the button. It does have a camera on it, but that is really where people get face to face with remote supports. Those are those daily check-in calls. Those are, you know, wellness checks and stuff like that. We have seizure mitigation with the bed sensor. We also offer a watch. But there's so many different options. We even have a C-pen reader. So for someone who is visually impaired, they can actually, it's like a little pen and it reads over and it reads out loud to you to where they can enjoy reading. I mean, there's just so many different options, but sensor wise, anything from bed present to motion sensors to open and close sensors, and all of that runs passively in the background. So there's no one that needs to touch anything or anything of that nature. Great
Very
questions.
nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. Any more questions for Ms. Walkers? We got it.
All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Y'all need to swap. Are we good? Okay. We are going to cover really quickly CWP self-directed services and supported decision-making, which falls under guardianship reform. All right. Everybody knows and has probably heard about. First, let me start off this way. Does anybody not know what a waiver is or how to get onto the waiting list to get a waiver? By waiver, we mean funding for Medicaid, from Medicaid for services and supports. All right. If anybody pops in online with that question, waiver services are provided through the Centers for Medicaid Services, federal funding, given to us, or what's the better word there? Utilized, processed through the Alabama Department of Mental Health. So you call this number 1-800-361-4491 and you say, I think we need to start receiving waiver services. And there are eligibility questions they will ask you to make sure that you qualify. If your child has, or your loved one has, an intellectual disability, a developmental disability, or a mental health concern, then they qualify. The question is, what do they qualify for? How much do they qualify for? And when can they start receiving those services? Right now, up until now, we've been operating out of a crisis mode, or in other words, you had to have a crisis happen. You'd be placed on a waiting list to receive those services when you qualify. That waiting list could be very long for you, or it could be short-lived if you had some kind of emergency or crisis in your family that bumped you up to toward the top of the waiting list. In other words, there's no other way you're going to get by in life without these services. We have to have them now, right? So in the past, we were operating out of that crisis mode. You get the services when you absolutely have to have them, and there's no other way around it. We're trying to get away from that and create a more proactive approach through our CWP waiver system. That does not mean, I don't want anybody to mishear me or misunderstand, that does not mean that the other waiver services are going away. Another way to look at it is we are now redirecting as many as we can toward the community waiver program so that they're not sitting on the waiting list getting nothing, waiting for a horrible thing to happen to get something. Does that make sense? So the community waiver program exists to meet the needs of those who could be getting services right now if they were not on the waiting list or didn't have a crisis. The community waiver program, and I'm going to pass these around for you, is literally, I don't want to say, we're not supposed to say the word pilot program, so I'm not going to say the word pilot program, but it's a process. If you'll take one and pass it all the way around, you can kind of read on there. It's let me borrow one from you. It's a process that basically gets people in the front door, starts providing supports and services that are as community-based as we can make them, and helps, we hope, to become a preventative measure so that we're not setting people up to be 100% dependent on supports and services from the system as they age. In other words, if we can do a little bit now, or a little bit more than a little bit now, maybe as they age and become elderly, they won't need as much because they've developed this skill set and understand how to live independently at this level. All right, so it's a much more proactive approach to our waiver system. I'm just going to read this for those of you online and watching. We'll pass the resource list around and we'll put it in the chat online so that everything passed around here today, you'll have access to too. But the community waiver program is a waiver program that will offer services to people with intellectual disabilities in 5 enrollment groups based on their age, relative independence, each with a set of services designed to serve them. The children with ID, ages 3 to 13, who live with family or other natural supports. All right, that's the first one. That's the first enrollment group. The next one is the transition aged youth with intellectual disabilities, ages 14 through 21, who live with family and other natural supports, or ages 18 to 21 who live independently. All right, so that's the next enrollment group. We've also got working age or older adults with intellectual disabilities, ages 22 and up, and those who live with family or other natural supports or who can live independently. Individuals with intellectual disabilities, 3 and up, who are unable to live with family or other natural supports or independently. So that's its own enrollment group. Okay, the last one, individuals with intellectual disabilities, ages 22 and up, who have a minimum of 1 substantial functional limitation. All right, so that's your enrollment groups. If they qualify through any of these enrollment groups based on need, then they would qualify for the community waiver. We hope that this waiver meets its full intent within 5 years. We're I want to say 2. Are we about 2 years? Maybe less than 2, almost 2 years in. And for lack of education on the topic, which is a big part of why we're having these town hall meetings, just not enough people understand the waiver program and are willing to try it at the same time, as we have had a stall from the last 2 years with COVID. It kind of shut things down for a little while. But we're about halfway through what we had intended to be on with the first year. So there were originally 500 spots. I think we're at almost 200 of those slots filled. So we've got some catching up to do. It's right now only happening in 5 counties within each of one of the regions around the state. If anybody online knows exactly which of those 5 counties, let me know. I don't have them memorized. I know Jefferson County is one, and I'm pretty sure Baldwin County is one. I hope so. That'd be great. I don't have my, that read? Ah, thank you. All right, yes. Baldwin, Elmore, Houston, Jefferson, Limestone, Madison, Mobile, Montgomery, Morgan, Tuscaloosa, and Walker. That's more than 5. Well, good. They open more? Put my glasses back on. Great. So we're up to 11 counties now. Great, great, great. Okay. Again, the number to call at the call center, 1-800-361-4491. If you think you or your loved one would be able to enroll in this waiver program, I highly recommend it. I've worked with several people on this waiver program as a employee of a provider care service. It can work wonders when it is done right. It can be life-changing. I highly recommend you tell your friends and families about it. Go out and tell anybody you know who's still on the waiting list. Try the community waiver program, because at least you're going to be getting supports and services instead of sitting there waiting on them and not getting anything, right? Okay. Questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, you need the...
What I'm about to say, I know it should happen. I don't know if it is happening.
Okay.
But I think most of the parents here, our children are well beyond the age of 21. We're on ID waivers. But for those who are still in the school, who are still school age, this is a new program.
Right.
This is awesome. They need this. We talk to people in the community. Is there a representative, excuse me, in the special ed department, excuse me, in the school, in the public school systems in these counties that can go to these IEP meetings, and when they're having their transition from school to work meetings to share this information?
Ideally, it hasn't happened yet. What I would like to see is a way for VR to partner with, what I would like to see is a way for VR to partner with our school systems and reach out to those support coordinators at the IEP level when they turn age 14, because that's when they're supposed to start getting transition services in the school, and say, hey, we have this waiver program. Your child may be eligible. That's what I would like to see happen. I'm not sure that it's happening yet. That's definitely a viable angle. There's always grassroots advocacy. We can always go around to our friends and our neighbors and the people that we know who have a child that age and say, you should talk to your support coordinator. When I'm not talking about the support coordinators from the provider care system, I'm talking about the support coordinators in special ed. Okay. You should go and talk to your support coordinator on your IEP team, your special ed support coordinator, and say, we have something called the community waiver program in Alabama now. You're 14, you're 15, you're 16. You would probably qualify. You need to talk to ADMH and VR about that. Go ahead.
My name is Beth Hanks. I'm a VR supervisor, and I was a former transition counselor. When I was going to IEPs, the special ed teachers most of the time depended on the VR counselor to know what was out there after school. And so I think it's important to get this information about this waiver to the VR counselors, because most of the time the special ed team or the teacher that's running the IEP is not going to be familiar with these kinds of services, in my experience.
I would agree with you on that. And I think that that's definitely one of the goals or the agenda items on the list for CAP right now. In special ed. There is supposed to be.
We have to be invited. We have to be invited. The parent, most of the time, it's changed a lot over the years, but the parent has to sign that any outside entity can attend the IEP. That's a special ed question, because
That's why I brought up CAP. Yeah, so they would implement that process. They would go into the public schools and say, hey, we're going to do it this way now. They could. All right. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am. I wish Dr. Peebles was here right now.
Personal assistance in the home and community on CWP. Would that include personal care for people with more significant disabilities? Or should people with more significant physical disabilities stay away from the community waiver?
I would like to throw that back to Dr. Peebles, but he's not here. So what I'm going to say, okay, let's do it this way. For our audience online too, and for me, describe the difference between personal assistance and personal care. I think I know what it is, but I don't want to say it the wrong way. And I know that you know. Oh, that is your question.
That's our question.
Okay. So what I think personal care would be, Alex, can I use you as an example? Personal care. So what I understand personal care to be would be any kind of hygiene needs, bathing, toileting, feeding, things like that, of that nature, right? So personal assistance would be more of the one-on-one support out in a community and guiding an activity within the person-centered plan itself. Does that make sense? So if you wrote your PCP accordingly and said, one of the things I need my personal assistant to attend to would be personal care, I would imagine that that would be included. Have you experienced anything to the contrary?
As significant needs, physical needs,
Uh-huh.
would the community waiver program be able to address those needs
So
as the
I
ID
gotcha.
and the living at home
I gotcha.
waivers
So you're
do?
asking if you transition to the community waiver program, the community waiver,
People that need a waiver now,
right?
with whichever, with significant physical needs who need personal care.
Right.
Should those people avoid the community waiver?
I would never recommend anybody avoiding waiver services. But when you could say you did live in one of these 11 counties where it was operating and provided, could you not write your PCP to reflect personal assistance for personal care within that waiver? That would be my approach. That would be my suggestion. I think it's going to come down to the rate study.
Right. In the original pilot of the program, the 5 counties, those services were not covered in the CWP. Now, if they realize that there's a different audience out there and that we've added these other counties, if I'm not mistaken, they're opening up, and I think when it kicks off again in August, they're opening up the same services. So if you're getting a service and ID, it's going to be available in the CWP. And if you're coming that way, when you're coming into it, and instead of being on a waiting list and you need that service, it's the only way you were getting it before was getting on the waiting list on the ID. Now you'll be able to do the CWP. And that's coming up. I don't know when that's going in. That was discussed. It might be an implementation now. I'm not sure, but I think it's, for some reason, the date of August popped in my head. And I think that's when they're going to implement that crossover.
Fingers crossed. Okay, great questions. Any more questions on CWP? Okay, now all of that information we just gave you on waiver services, home and community-based services. Let me get this right. Remote supports. I kept calling it home-enabled tech, remote supports, same thing. All of that can be, if you so choose, self-directed. And I love self-directed. Self-directed is one of my favorite things in the world, because for people like my son who grew up being told what he was going to do, where he was going to go, who he was going to be with, how long he was going to be there, not having a lot of choices. If anybody had bothered to stop and ask Colby what his opinions, thoughts, or ideas were on certain things that changed, altered the trajectory of his life, he would have been able to answer them. He would have been able to say, I want this. I think I can do that. Let's try this. He would have had an answer had anybody bothered to ask him, but they didn't most of the time. Most of the time he was told, both within the school system, wherever else it was outside of the school system and extracurricular activities, most of his life he was told what he was going to do, where he was going to go, who he was going to be with, how long he had to be there. It literally was very, very seldom his choice. Self-directed services flips that and says, you choose. We want to hear from you. Your voice matters. Your thoughts and ideas and feelings and opinions count. Tell us what you think you want to do. Tell us how you want this to go. That's self-directed services, and it's within each of the waiver systems, and it's supposed to help us get out of the mindset of speaking for somebody else when they can very easily, maybe with some support, speak for themselves. We are not suggesting or asking that we all agree with what they want to do. I didn't always ask for permission growing up. I made some of my worst mistakes in my 20s, but they were mine. And that's where I learned the most in life from. And I can assure you, with some of the decisions I made, my parents did not agree with those decisions, but that's how I learned. I was just automatically afforded the dignity of risk when I went out into the world to college, and I made some mistakes and I learned from that. Without providing the dignity of risk, without respecting somebody's voices, without listening to what they want, then we're just limiting them, and it's incredibly unfair. So that's what self-directed services is all about. There's a lot of different ways to run it on each waiver. There's a lot of different aspects to it. But if you don't have self-directed services reflected word for word in your person-centered plan, I highly recommend you get that in there. You don't even have to say, I'm doing self-directed services. You can just say, my son, my daughter, my cousin, my aunt wants fill in the blank. You don't have to identify it as self-directed services as long as it qualifies under those HCBS settings. That's how it's supposed to work. Does anybody have any real life examples of that working for them? All right, anybody online with anything? Okay, good. Last but not least, we're almost done. All right, we covered everything. The last one is guardianship reform, and this is what Betty was talking about earlier. What I just said to you about my son's experiences in life is changing rapidly, but it didn't change for him until after we got out of school, after Colby graduated from high school. Colby was put into the self-contained classroom for the vast majority of his academic life. Colby did not want to be in the self-contained classroom. By the time he got to 9th grade, he said repeatedly, I don't want to be in these classes. Colby wanted to be in the general ed classrooms with his peers, learning about the same things at the same time. It took 2.5 years of really hard work with our IEP team to get Colby out of the self-contained classroom just for half of the day. And even then at that point, even though the LR, the least restricted environment piece of the IEP at the end, even though at that point it said that he would be in the general ed classroom for half of the day, I'm not 100% sure that that schedule was being followed. Because we were limited on our access to go into the school, and now we have cameras in the self-contained classroom as one of the bills that passed this year. But because we didn't have cameras in the self-contained classroom, we were limited on our access. All I could do was believe what was written down on a piece of paper. Do I believe that he was in those general ed classrooms for half of the school day? Not based on what he was telling me, not at all. But it made its way into the IEP. All of that to say, by the time Colby graduated from high school, we were really done with and frustrated and over with being told what Colby was going to do and how Colby was going to do it. Because we could recognize and see the pattern was whenever Colby would speak up and say, I want to try this, I want to do that. If we listened, 9 times out of 10, it went really well. And you want to know why? Because that's what he wanted. If you're trying to force a square peg into a round hole, it's going to be tough. And so that was a good way to look at his experience in school, was trying to force a square peg into a round hole for all those years. And then all of a sudden, when we started to try to change our mindset and we realized, oh, we don't have to do it this way. There's another way to do it. Things got a lot better. One of the examples of that is our experience with guardianship. When Colby was in 9th grade, he was in the band. And at the end of the year in the band, everybody got up, did a concert to celebrate everything and the seniors and where they were going to go to college. And so the seniors all started announcing where they were going to go to college after they graduated from high school. We had not even considered college for Colby at that point. I'm ashamed to admit it was not part of my own expectations for Colby, because I didn't think that he could go to college without getting an actual high school diploma. That was just not even in the realm of possibility for me. And I've always told parents this, but it's funny because we got to try to live it out ourselves, right? But hold high expectations, because without them, what have you got? You might as well think it, dream it, and believe it and try, right? So Colby came home after this concert and said, Mom, where am I going to go to college? And I love his question and how he asked it, because he wasn't asking if. He had already established in his mind, just like all of his peers had just said, we're going to college. That's not the question. The question was where. And I love that, because it forced me into what I call detective mode or investigative mode. I had to start coming up with answers to Colby's questions, which was, where am I going to go to college? So we went online, we did some research, we did some asking around. Long story short, we discovered these Think College programs that I was just talking to you about. There's 5 in Alabama. One of them is at the University of Alabama. One of them is at the University of Auburn. The Auburn one is called the Eagles program. The one at Alabama is called Crossing Points. I think there's also one at Jacksonville State, if I'm not mistaken. I know there's one at Montevallo through age 21 if you're still in high school. And say that Alabama South. Do they have residential? Not yet. Oh, okay. So I hope so. Different, you need to do the research yourself. Different campuses and different programs provide different services and settings. Some of them have residential services provided on campus, some don't. Alabama and Auburn do. Long story short, we were determined at that point, okay, Colby's going to go to college. He has decided he wants to go to college. Maybe he can qualify for one of these programs. We went back and started looking at his IEP goals. Come to find out, if he was going to be able to qualify for one of these programs, his IEP goals needed to change and reflect several things. For example, at least a third grade reading level, which at that time it did not, but he could. So we changed that. Another thing was, sorry, I'm talking too fast. Another thing was that we realized most, if not all, of these programs either preferred or required that you enroll as your own guardian. Well, that was confusing because we kept hearing in our IEP team meetings, when Colby turns 19, Mr. and Mrs. Spangler, you need to become his guardian. That's what we do. And in fact, it almost to me sounded like a threat. I'm not sure it was, but it felt intimidating. In fact, Mr. and Mrs. Spangler, if you want to continue to join us in these IEPT meetings, or when Colby goes to the doctor, if you want to be in on those doctor appointments, then you need to become his guardian. That's what we were being told by our IEP team. So I believed them. Why wouldn't I? And I was upset because our IEP team is telling us become his guardian, while if he's going to go to college, he needed to be his own. So what do? We were at a crossing points, for lack of a better word. We had to decide, and I went straight to ADAP, Alabama Disability and Advocacy Program, and asked, is this true? Do we have to become his guardians? And if so, what does that mean if he wants to get into one of these programs? Can you help us? And they did. And it was not true. We did not have to become his guardians. There were other ways around it. You've got POAs, power of attorney. You've got advanced care directives. You've got limited guardianships as opposed to full guardianships. There were other options on the table. The only issue was, it was about choice. It was about Colby retaining his rights and maintaining his voice and ability to demand those rights stay in place. And there wasn't an option for that. That's when we found out about supported decision-making. And I think, Tim, did you just pass those around? I think the microphone's sitting on it. So Tim's going to pass those around for you. Long story short, we decided there needed to be a change in the law, and there is now, and it's called the Colby Act. And the Colby Act provided an alternative to guardianship that helps you maintain all of those rights that you normally would have lost through a full guardianship, and create your own team agreement in lieu of a guardianship, so that you have natural supports that are voluntary throughout your life in one way or another, a lot, a little, anywhere in between, help you make those difficult decisions when you need them. That's what we did. It's called the Colby Act. It passed. There was a rally day, a lot of help from our DD network, from PIPA, from our providers. It was incredible to me to see the outpouring of support going forward for this. And that's because it's not unique to Alabama. There are currently 13 other states doing it. We were number 14. Aren't y'all glad we weren't last in that? I was so impressed. So that's where we are now. I will tell you, the Colby Act and supported decision-making as a concept is a piece of what we're calling guardianship reform. The whole system is now reforming from one state to the next. And we're learning that there's a better way to do this also. And so we're trying to create something called the Guardianship Bill of Rights. And so if you do have a guardianship, then some rights are still put back into place within that guardianship so that that person can speak for themselves as well as maintain the guardianship. So we're finding ways around all of this to make it easier and more accessible to not only support the person that needs the support, but also listen to their voices, understand what it is they're trying to say that they want or that they can do. And that's what the guardianship reform is all about. So the Colby Act and supported decision-making was a step toward that big picture guardianship reform. And that's next. If you want to Google some information about that, you can Google it. I would go to, it's on our resource list, supporteddecisionmaking.org, and make sure you read all about it. It's got plenty of national information, and they'll be updating Alabama's here now very soon. Ivy just signed it into law last week. So these are the resource lists that we've referred to in the meeting, all on this one sheet. I'm going to pass this around for anybody. There, I got this. Oh, good, good, good. Okay. So that wraps it up. I have some life course tools handouts right here for anybody that would like them. Come and get them after the meeting. This is how we formed and created Colby's supported decision-making team. It's a really good tool to use, whether you have a guardianship or not. You can still use these tools. I highly recommend them. All right. Any more questions? One, maybe? Yes, I will get you those. Absolutely. One important thing I'll say real quick is to make a supported decision-making team, you don't have to know a lot of people. You can know 2 or 3 and that'll do. Colby has a large team. Colby's got 10 people on his team plus himself, but that's substantial. It doesn't have to be that substantial. It can be as small or anywhere in between. The idea is that they're natural supports. They're not paid supports, because there are some differences, and some of those differences can be really good. But to find those natural supports within your community and within the circle of friends that you have who know you, love you, and would make sure that the best decisions are being made to support the person we love. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. We're good?
Yep. Thank you
Okay.
very much for coming. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, LBP Interpretation Services. Thank you, Dr. Peebles, for the facilities. Melissa, thank you for your information. Alex, thank you for filming us. If you have any questions as you go through that material, several ways to find out some things. You can go to our website, thearchofalabama.org, the Alabama Department of Health. This video will be uploaded in about a week on our Facebook pages and our websites. The resource guide that was handed out is on both websites. My business card and Kim's business cards over here. Pick them up, take them with you, call us anytime. If we don't know the answer or the answer's changed since the last time we were told, we'll find out the answer for you. But thank y'all very much for your very important questions and participation. And our next town hall is July 15th up in Huntsville. If you want to drive up there, that's fine. If you don't, you'll be live streamed. And don't forget about the ARC and ACE-ARC's Alabama Disability Conference, September 18th through the 20th in Montgomery. And if you have any questions or want to register for that, it has its own website, Alabama Disability Conference. Just Google it, pop it right to it, and all the forms are there. Thank y'all very much. Be safe going home. If you have to go back to work, I'm sorry.